Hi guys. Okay, kittens are calm now. Air Force jumped on the computer about 10 times. I had to yell at him, and he's now sleeping on the pillow. So, now that everyone is calm, we have Miss Fiasco up there. Now that everyone is calm, let's go ahead and get into the most serious part of our studies thus far. And we are going to talk about Jesus' arrest. And I do have a quote fitting for this moment, as well as Jesus' death. I will read the same quote for both of the topics, and I was thinking of combining the two topics, but we're just going to still remain with the format of the videos, separate videos for each topic. But let's go ahead and discuss the quote. A bolt is shot back somewhere in our breast, and a lost pulse of feeling stirs again. The eye sinks inward, and the heart lies plain. And what we mean we say, and what we would we know. A man becomes aware of his life's flow, and hears its winding murmur, and he sees the meadows where it glides, the sun, the breeze. And there arrives a lull in the hot race, wherein doth forever chase that flying and elusive shadow rest. An air of coolness plays upon his face, and an unwonted calm pervades his breast. And then he thinks he knows the hills where his life rose, and the sea where it goes. So this is a quote from Matthew Arnold, 1822 to 1888. It's from The Buried Life. It looks like it's chapter 1, page 84, or something like that. So I think this is a book, if I'm not mistaken, but it's just a very somber quote, right? It expresses a lot of emotion to what we're discussing currently. So I think this is a very fitting quote for this topic and the next topic. So we'll go ahead and combine those two together, or now that I'm thinking, question is next. Yes, we might as well. Actually, we maybe won't read the quote again, but this, leads up to that feeling, this somber feeling. Anyways, I'm going to try to focus as well as I possibly can. I'm very, very hungry, so we'll see what happens within our breakdown. But without further ado, we're going to read a passage from John, chapter 18, 19 through 19:16. John 18, verse 19. Okay. Meanwhile, the high priest questioned Jesus about his disciples' teaching. I have spoke openly to the world, Jesus replied. I always taught in the synagogues or at the temple, where all the Jews come together. I said nothing in secret. Why question me? Ask those who heard me. Surely they will know what I said. When Jesus said this, one of the officials nearby slapped him in the face. Is this the way you answer the high priest? He demanded. If I said anything wrong, Jesus replied, testify as to what is wrong. But if I spoke the truth, why did you strike me? Then Annas sent him bound to Caiaphas the high priest. And just a little side note here, we are reading the same excerpt that we read earlier, but it's from a different gospel. So it's a little bit of a retelling in a slightly different way. Anyways, yes, just so you're aware. Meanwhile, Simon Peter was still standing there warming himself. So they asked him, You aren't one of his disciples too, are you? He denied it, saying, I am not. One of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, challenged him. Didn't I see you with him at the garden? Again, Peter denied it. And at that moment, a rooster began to crow. Then the Jewish leaders took Jesus from Caiaphas to the place of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanliness, they did not enter the palace because they wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out and asked, What charges are you bringing against this man? "If he were not a criminal," they replied, "we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own law." "But we have no right to execute anyone," they objected. This took place to fulfill what Jesus had said about the kind of death he was going to die. Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Is that your own idea?" Jesus asked, "or did others talk to you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied. "Your own people and chief priests handed you over to me. What is it you have done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jewish leaders. But now my kingdom is from another place." "You are a king then," said Pilate. Jesus answered, "You may say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into this world is to testify the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." "What is truth?" retorted Pilate. With this he went out again to the Jews gathered there and said, "I find no basis for a charge against him, but it is your custom for me to release to you one prisoner at the time of Passover. Do you want me to release the king of the Jews?" They shouted back, "No, not him. Give us Barabbas." Now Barabbas had taken part in an uprising. Entering into chapter 9. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they slapped him in the face. Once more Pilate came out and said to the Jews gathered here, "Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him." When Jesus came out wearing a crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify, crucify!" But Pilate answered, "You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him." The Jewish leaders insisted, "We have a law, and according to that law he must die, because he claimed to be the Son of God." But when Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid, and he went back inside the palace. "Where do you come from?" he asked Jesus. But Jesus gave him no answer. "Do you refuse to speak to me?" Pilate said. "Don't you realize I have power to either free you or to crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jewish leaders kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar." When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat on the judge's seat at a place known as the Stone Pavement, which in Aramaic is Gabbatha. For it was the day of preparation of the Passover. It was about noon. "Here is your king," Pilate said to the Jews. But they shouted, take him away, crucify him." "Shall I crucify your king?" Pilate asked. "We have no king but Caesar," the chief priests answered. Finally, Pilate handed him over to be crucified. So the soldiers took charge of Jesus. So this is his trial. This is the trial. The trial. So, yes, it's a lot. Just, reading back to it, it's a lot. Let me just go ahead and see what I feel the need to mention here. There's moments where Pilate was like, I'm not doing this as somewhat of a just ruler. He's, trying to take this as seriously as he can. But there's moments too where Pilate really does make Jesus, makes a mockery out of Jesus. He doesn't, understand who he is. Like what we were talking about earlier, the dichotomy between the rulers of the time and then, of course, Jesus and the more lowly people, even the Israelites and the Romans. That dichotomy was huge. So it's very possible it seems like this is the case here, reading this, that Pilate had no idea, who Jesus was. He wasn't even hearing, things, it was the Jewish leaders that had the biggest problem. So Pilate wasn't necessarily the enemy, but without knowing who Jesus actually was, and he was trying to inquire, but it just got a little confuzzled. But yes, Pilate and the Romans aren't necessarily the enemies that we make them out to be, but they really just had zero awareness and zero perception of what was going on at the time within the community of Israel, even though they were in fact, governing the region. So it's a little bit weird to think about that, to think that they really had, no conception of who Jesus was and things like that, or maybe he did and he was just quite literally what I said, making a mockery out of him. Just the fact that he allowed, I don't know if it was him personally, but the fact that he allowed to have the robe put on him and the crown of thorns, and then he showed them, it just is very highly disrespectful. Highly disrespectful. It made Jesus appear gaudy, and if you don't know what gaudy means, it means just cheap, it was just not a good look. And yes, extravagantly bright or showy, typically as to be tasteless. So that gaudiness actually, gave Jesus the image of just mockery, right? And that's what appealed to the Jewish leaders, to be so harsh and be like, crucify, crucify. I mean, they were planning on killing him. They were planning on executing him. They didn't think, I don't even think Jesus was aware that it was going to be something as intense as crucifixion. Because that really is for the worst of the worst. I don't even think Barabbas would have been sentenced to this type of crucifixion. It was common. It was honestly common, but there were other ways that they killed people that was not crucifixion. So yeah, very, very serious. Just ironic how this is, the day of the preparation of the Passover. The Sabbath is going to be happening the next day, and they're just, all up in arms. The religious leaders are all up in arms about this. They're confused. But what I like to think, or what I know to be true, is the Jewish leaders, even though they were very religiously oriented, they had all these customs, they had all these scriptures, and they were blind and deaf. They were simply blind and deaf to the light. Because how could the scripture talk about all of these things happening? You're going to have this person arriving and you're going to kill him. It says exactly what is going to happen to Jesus within the scripture. So how are they teachers of the law and teachers of the religion, and how are they blind and deaf to the scripture? To be able to understand scripture, you cannot be blind and you cannot be deaf spiritually, right? So, the fact that the Jewish leaders had the scripture and they were just still so ignorant to the fact that it's happening and it's playing out right in front of them, it just didn't make any sense. But now, to understand the nature of the Spirit, it shows that they were in fact spiritually blind and deaf. So, and again, not to go on to my esoteric rant here, but the moment, I just want to prove to you what my intuition is saying and what I know to be true also of the Spirit. This moment here, I mean, Jesus is talking back. We know Jesus' nature. We know Jesus' words. He talks and he's explaining himself. And he's, being forthright and forthcoming. He's being forthcoming. He's being outspoken. He's saying, I have taught in the synagogues or at the temple. I said nothing in secret. Why question me? Ask the people that heard me. They will know. He's advocating for himself. We did not have lawyers at this time. He's advocating for himself. And after even just talking back and advocating for himself, he gets slapped in the face by one of the officials.